Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the first episode of our third season. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it. It's our third season.
I know. I'm super excited about that.
I'm
proud of us.
Yes, I am too. I mean, a couple of years ago when you called me and said, I have an idea. Would you be interested in starting a podcast? And at first I was like, I really don't know a lot about podcasts, but yeah, if you're in, Donna, I'm in. I think I said at one time, I'm kind of like Rose from the Titanic or whatever. If you jump, I jump. So if you wanted to do something, I wanted to do it as well. So I'm so excited.
Well, thank you for jumping with me because I'm super excited about how well we've been doing. I'm also grateful for all the guests that have been on with us.
Yes, we have been so fortunate, and I'm so glad that we did that starting. And I think it was the beginning of season 2 that we thought let's shake it up a little bit. Let's start bringing people in, whether they're writers or book influencers. We've got 2 that are coming up soon that are editors, and just all kinds of different people to bring to the podcast because this book industry is a lot more than just the writers. I mean, you've got a lot of behind the scenes to get a book out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today we are both very excited and in character, I might add, for the theme of today's episode, which is writing resistance, breaking down the Handmaid's Tale from the writer's lens. Welcome to episode 48. I am Donna Carbone, and I am joined by Hope Gibbs.
Hello, everyone. And I guess what we usually always start, unless we're interviewing, is what are you reading? So, Donna, this is a very appropriate. What are you reading this month?
So I am rereading this month The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. I read it when it very first came out, and I'm super excited to watch the streaming series. So I want to reread it again before that comes out. How about you?
Well, in the spirit of this, I am reading The Testaments as well, because as when we decided that we were going to tackle this subject, this was a couple of months ago. Yeah. I had already read the Handmaid's Tale. I'd already watched Hulu, and I had already seen the 1990s movie version, which is actually my first experience with ever knowing about the Handmaid's Tale, and we're going to talk about that later. And so I'm one of these people that I want to know what happens next. And so The Testaments is actually very interesting because it's told from 3 different POVs, one of which is Aunt Lydia. And for those of you who have either read the book, watched the series on Hulu, or you've read, watched the movie, it's very interesting seeing her in this light.
Yeah, a very different shift.
A very different shift. So, yeah. So let's get there. Let's get started. Let's talk about this book. This book is also, as you and I both, we both have enjoyed it. We appreciate the way that Margaret Atwood writes, but it's also a controversial book. There are people out there that do not like this book. You and I are on the other side of it. We both enjoyed this book. So let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale.
Okay. So I'm going to take you back to college. I was taking a college course in feminist societies, and we were reading about utopias and dystopias. And so we read The Handmaid's Tale, and I absolutely loved it because around that same time, I was reading a lot of Virginia Woolf's work, and she writes in very stream of consciousness, which this is as well. We hear from Offred, and her story is very much in her head. And so we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to kind of the different writing tools that Atwood uses. But initially, when I read this book, I liked it because it had so many layers to it. I recognized some of the historical references in it at the time, and I also recognized a lot of the biblical allusions. And that was the thing that really attracted me. As I mentioned, I was in college. I knew I was going to become a teacher, and that was one of the books that I was hoping to be able to teach one day. And so, fast forward many years, probably about 20 or 25 years, I started teaching. Started teaching AP language and composition. And in that, we talk about rhetoric and the writer's lens. What are the writers, what tools is the writer using to create the story? And so I thought, what a great opportunity to bring this novel into the curriculum. And this was even before Donald Trump came on the political landscape. So what about you, Hope? Do you want to share your sort of origin story with The Handmaid's Tale?
I wish mine was as intellectual as yours. I'd never heard of the book. I became familiar with The Handmaid's Tale because there was a 1990s movie that I stumbled across, I think, one day on cable back when, basic cable, you had basic cable, but then you had HBO, which was a really big deal. And it had Robert Duvall, and it had Faye Dunaway. Now, I remember Faye Dunaway from Mommy Dearest, and that woman, scared me to death, but I was intrigued because, these were two really big Hollywood, actors. And so I started watching it. And, I think I've told our audience, I'm a good dystopian future person. I rewatch Armageddon. I love Deep Impact. If there is a dystopian future or, something bad coming up, like as I would call it, end of the world kind of scenario, that's my movie. But when I watched the movie, I think I was probably 21 at the time. I was like, this is weird. This could never happen. So to me, it was dystopian future. It wasn't something that could be maybe predictive. And when I started doing research later, finding out that everything that Margaret Atwood based the Society of Gilead, this fictional country that has kind of replaced the United States, she has used things that have happened in history. Now, there is no Gilead. This is completely of her imagination, but all the things that happened to this society can be traced somewhere in the world at some point. So then that really kind of made me, gave me a little creeps because I was like, this isn't just completely made up. But that's how I discovered it. And then a few years ago, I think it was maybe 6 years ago, was when the Hulu series came out. I was like, oh. And so I started watching. I watched the first season of that. And then that's when I read the book. So unfortunately, I kind of went backwards. I picked it up from a movie to a miniseries to, well, maybe I need to read this book. And so that was how I came across The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Well, you talk about a lot. You talked about the historical references in it, and while I recognize some of them, I also, at the time, thought, "Oh my God, this could never happen in our society." There wasn't any inkling that this would ever come to pass in the United States. And Sarah Grinberg does a podcast, and she did an episode called The Dark Truth About the Handmaid's Tale, which I listened to. And she goes into all of the historical references. And they're not only historical references, because some of what happened in the Handmaid's Tale is still happening now in parts of the world. And so she does a really nice job. So I will put that in the show notes because I think that that's really interesting. I do want to kind of follow up on what I mentioned about teaching The Handmaid's Tale, because I did teach it before Donald Trump came onto the political landscape. In 2016, when he was elected president, a lot of dystopian literature's book sales went up.
Yeah.
Like Orwell's 1984, Brave New World, this one also. And I thought that was really interesting. I still wasn't seeing a direct connection until after the overturning of Roe
Yes.
v. Wade. I think that was the thing that kind of screamed to me like, wow, there are elements of this that certainly could happen here.
Yeah. And just for everyone to know, The Handmaid's Tale was written in 1985.
Mm,
So this was not something that now the Testaments, obviously, I think that one came out in 2020, 2021.
mhm.
But The Handmaid's Tale was written in 1985. And
Yeah.
again, as when I consumed it as a younger woman, I didn't think of the implications that, there are elements of this story that are based in reality, which I think makes the story more compelling and more chilling. What
Yeah.
do you think about that, Donna?
Yeah, I think so too, because I think, in our reality, we see advancements in so many things. We don't see us going backwards. We
Yeah,
don't see us losing some of our inherent rights and privileges. And
yeah.
so, that's something that we're seeing today. And I want to point out a quote by June's character in the novel. And she says, if it's only a story, it becomes less frightening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's
That's
a pretty powerful quote by Margaret Atwood in the 1980s, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think this woman is a true visionary.
Well, for those who have not read The Handmaid's Tale or know or watched the movie or whatever, this is a futuristic society that part of the United States has collapsed, and it's under a religious kind of
Regime.
government. It's a
Yeah.
religious government that
Mhm.
all women, and it happens very quickly. They stage a attack in Washington, which starts halting certain things in government. And this group, they were able to take away women being able to first to work. Women can no longer work outside the home. At the same time, they freeze all their bank accounts, and all their money goes straight to the male. If they have a husband, or if they have a father or a brother, and then it's just like it's amazing how just these little things all of a sudden happen. And the characters later on, they do talk about, they in their thoughts, they
Mm,
should have seen it coming.
yeah.
But that's a little bit about The Handmaid's Tale if you haven't read it. But the thing about it, what I love about what Atwood does is this inner voice of the main character, because you feel like you are there with this character. There's a lot of telling on that perspective, but
Mhm.
it's so important because you feel like you are in that same room with June. But the funny thing is, they only say her name once in the book, and so because she's always called Fred,
Right.
or Alfred, because she is the handmaid of the commander named Fred. So all women the handmaids have to take the name of the commander, and you add the word of,
Yeah.
which is also chilling.
Yeah, that took me a while to figure that out when I read it the first time. That was
Yeah.
very confusing to me. Um, this whole society is set up under the guise of religion and the need for women to have babies, and so that's where the handmaids come in.
Well,
Um,
there is there's an issue in the world, because
right.
in the beginning of this book, the fertility rates have plummeted, and only a few women, I think it's like 1 out of 100. I think I read that somewhere in that book. One out of
Mhm.
100, or maybe it was in one of the adaptations, could actually have children. So having children became such a huge issue for them to be able to, I guess, keep the world going, or whatnot. And it's not just in the United States; it's worldwide. The fertility rates have plummeted. So that's the other aspect. So that's kind of also a inciting incident, not really an incident, but it's an inciting reason why we have Gilead.
Yeah. Yeah. And another quote in that vein is that Offred says, "It's never been about piety; it's
Yeah.
always been about power."
Yeah.
Mm.
It's again, it is, the book is, so it was so ahead of its time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the adaptations. So the adaptation that most everyone knows is from this. This is the Hulu version. The star is Elizabeth Moss. She is fantastic as June. But in this adaptation, June is quite different than the movie version, and a little bit honestly different than in the book. Because in the book, June is not, she's a fighter, but she is not the fighter that you get to know in the six seasons of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu.
Right.
Donna, what did you think about that? I mean, because obviously they had to come up with 6 seasons, because after season 1, it's completely on their own. They create that world.
Right, right. And I think that's important to know. I think when I was watching the very first season, I was watching it um from the lens of a writer, probably because I had read the book and I was looking to see how closely they
Mhm.
aligned the series with the book, and they did a really nice job of that, particularly the way that they take Offred's narrative. They use a lot of voiceover narration, especially in the beginning of the series.
Yes.
You see that kind of go away as they move on into the episode or the seasons 2 through 6. But yes, they do advance June's character quite a bit. And in reading the testaments, having read the testaments already,
Yeah.
I do think that they kept that in mind with the idea of perhaps making the testaments into a series at one point, because I do think that June's character is very true to how her character is portrayed in the testaments.
Yeah. So the Hulu series, obviously, as I said, they ran out of material after the first season because they were pretty close. There were some differences and whatnot, but season 2 through 6 completely outside of the book. The 1990 movie, which I watched, it really was close to the movie. There were a few changes, the what the handmaids wore were a little bit different in the movie. I think that was visually, that was just a director, deciding to not do the big white hats or bonnets that they use. But one of the problems with the 1990 movie was there was no inner dialogue. So the main character is played by Natasha Richardson, and you don't get, although she does a beautiful job with what she was given, you don't get that inner monologue, and that really changes the stakes of the entire story. It's still an interesting story, but after seeing the Hulu series and after reading the book, you miss so much. And it was so much so that Natasha Richardson and the director, they had an issue with each other, and so did the writer who wrote the screenplay, because the director took out that inner monologue, and you don't get as close to June, the character, as you would otherwise. So I think that the inner monologue, that was a key for both the series on Hulu and in the book.
Yeah, I would agree. I also she was called Kate in the movie.
Yes, she was.
And I thought that that choice was interesting as well. That they kind of because in the very first chapter of The Handmaid's Tale, you get a list of the new handmaids that are in the gym, and they're whispering
Yes.
their name to each other. And so there is a list of names, and you're not quite sure who this main character is.
Yes.
And I thought it was interesting that they named her Kate and
Yeah,
June.
that was a big difference. And
Yeah.
when I was reading, because I'd already saw the show, I'd seen the movie. So I went back and I kept going, I don't remember seeing her name June ever. So
Yeah.
because I read so much on my phone and my Kindle, I put in the word June, and it's only at the very beginning.
Right.
So I was like, oh, that
Yeah.
was another thing. But yes, they did change her name, which I don't know why they did that. But there was a great article that I put on our show notes, and it's from an article from Collider. And it was talking about why the 1990 movie, although great stars, why it didn't work. And one of it was because, and I'm going to quote this, it was through the narration, that is precisely the character that we needed. a woman shocked that she has missed all the signs of an upcoming doom, utterly alone and doing her best just to survive. And so again, you miss that. And I think you also miss a little bit of June's tenacity,
Yeah.
because she does have to survive in obviously not ideal circumstances. She's in this world that has put her, because again, I don't know if we even mentioned this, June is relegated to being a handmaid. She has to produce children for the commander and his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting in the series is kind of an advancement of her character is that they developed the characters much more so around June in the series than they
Yes.
did in the novel. And so one of those developments was with her mom, who was a civil rights activist. And so in the series, you hear June saying at the end, the mother doesn't want June to go out and, fight to diminish Gilead. She wants her to stay with her mom and her daughter. And June turns to her mother and she says, "You taught me to fight like this." And so I thought that that was a really interesting addition to the series.
So have you ever thought about writing a character like June? Not a dystopian future, but I'm talking about with the inner dialogue. What do you think about that for
Yeah,
2025? Is that something that writers can do? Is it something we should try?
I don't know. I'm fascinated by that. As I mentioned, like that's what Virginia Woolf does in nearly all her works. Um, and I do think I use a lot of inner dialogue in my books with my main characters, not to this extent, but I like that. I think that it gives depth to the characters.
Well, again, this was an eye-opening experience to read something again that's 40 years old,
Yeah.
and today it's just as relevant, as important as it was when it was published. And I think in 1985 people didn't realize exactly what they had.
Yeah.
It definitely is one of those books that has really aged well with time. And not
Oh,
every book,
absolutely.
especially a book that you're writing about a completely new society, has that. So kudos. I wish that I had. I wish I had that creativity in me, that I could use things in our past, even biblical. Like, I mean, she
Yeah.
definitely uses biblical references, and to create this whole world as almost a cautionary tale.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is, part of her genius and something that was not recognized until it became, not that it wasn't recognized, but not recognized certainly to this degree
To
until
this
it
degree.
became relevant. Yes.
Well, so as our teacher, I know it's summer break and we should
Mm.
give you a break, but tell us, what is our homework for this episode?
We would strongly recommend that you read these, not only because they are two works of really good literature. They're behind me if you're watching on YouTube. They're two works of very good literature, but also I think thought provoking in the political climate that we're living in right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Donna, real quick, what is our next episode?
So our next episode, we are interviewing Lisa Montanaro, debut author and friend of ours. She's also with our publishing house, and she recently released her debut novel. So we'll be talking about that.
Which I have read. I absolutely love. I cannot recommend it enough. And as always, everyone, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, and also check us out on Instagram and give us a follow.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Until next time.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.